First of all, I want to thank Mr. V.M. Bansal, your chairman and formerly principal secretary in DDA. He, of course, is an old friend from Punjab, and we've known him and his family for a long time. So when he first asked me to come here, besides the fact that it's an honor to come and address young people, one always enjoys doing that, I was really wondering what is it that I can speak about that you might find interesting at this stage in your life. You are already mature young adults, and therefore I wanted to really speak to you about the whole concept of change, and more so, how this change is now impacting your lives and how it's going to impact the future. And that's a concept which some of you may have heard about. It's called mega trends. What is it that's really going to come about in the 21st century as we all look into it and go into the new horizons together? First, let me talk to you about change. You know, the ancient Greeks had a saying, nothing endures but change. That's another way of saying that the only thing that does not change is the fact of change itself. When I was a young student like you in Delhi University in the 1970s, there used to be a very famous philosopher who we used to always try to pretend we knew about. He said a very interesting thing. This was R.D. Laing. And he said a very interesting thing. He said, we live in a moment of history where change is so speeded up that we begin to see the present only when it's already disappearing. That's a it's a statement which we probably didn't really understand in the 70s, but you certainly understand it today because you live in the digital age. And today the speed of change is so dramatic, it actually changes virtually on a daily basis. For all of you today, starting in this new management program is itself a major change in your lives. This open academic environment that you find yourself in, where focus is on informal student interaction and self-study, it's so different from what you may have gone through earlier. Needless to say, this very style of higher education, especially in management studies, helps students from moving from adolescence to adulthood. Yet another change you will notice is how institutions serve as both as a learning environment where students develop attributes, as also a teaching environment where the focus is on enhancing knowledge. In today's world, and this is something which is very relevant to you, employers are placing greater emphasis on attitude and outlook rather than on functional knowledge. My interaction with CEOs of large companies yields an extensive list of qualities they desire from new recruits. These qualities can be summed up as a person being more innovative, flexible, and upright. Such requirements are attributes rather than skills. They are hard to measure, and many refer to them as soft skills. They can be learnt, but they are hard to teach. The learning takes place in the minds of the students rather than taught through various courses. This continued interaction between yourselves and with distinctive peer groups from a geographical diversity like you all are from all over India is what will help you to assimilate and yet stand out. The moot question is not whether merely attending classes here will condition you to adapt to change, but can you use this opportunity to acquire the skills to meet the needs of this ever-changing world? Will your 2 years here of learning give you such competence? Let me narrate a small story to underscore this point that I'm trying to make to you. This is the story of a young Chinese student who was sent from his village to study Kung Fu under the great Kung Fu master at a monastery. On the first day that he arrived and presented himself before the master, he was given a large bowl of water and told to hit the water with his hands till all the water splashed out of the bowl. And when the water finished, more water was poured in the bowl, and he was asked to continue to do this. He did this for an entire period of a year. Then time came for him to return home for the winter vacation. When he returned home, the village elder summoned him and told him, please demonstrate the skills that the master Kung Fu has taught you in the 1 year that you have spent. And they placed a large plank of wood before him and asked him to demonstrate his strength. The young boy was completely embarrassed. He didn't know what to do. He'd never been put with a plank of wood in front of him. He'd never been taught kung fu. But nevertheless, he summoned up the courage to avoid the embarrassment he was in and attempted to smash this plank with his bare hands. With the first blow, the thick plank broke into 2 pieces. Suddenly the boy realized that he had acquired the mighty skills of kung fu warrior without even realizing his own strength. This is what learning is really about. To me, the story exemplifies the hidden facet of studying at schools like this, where quite unconsciously you become management professionals. By the sheer vigor and rigor of handling day-to-day tasks, you will, at the end of your sojourn here, become both a master of your craft and managers. How hard is it to adjust to this change? It all depends on whether you like and you think that the change is your idea. When we decide to change, we usually jump in with both our feet and the possibilities that lie ahead. When forced upon us, we obviously don't quite enjoy it. Therefore, what we have to learn is to embrace change as a normal fact of our lives and don't fight it from within. Isn't it really our own perception of change that either holds us back or propels us forward? In other words, it's all about attitude, our attitude to change. The question, therefore, is our capacity and the challenge to meet it. Many of us, of course, have our own ideas of what is acceptable and what is not, and change somewhere lies in between that. In order to handle change, our attitudes must itself change. As citizens of this robust and liberal democracy that we are part of, we must be willing to accept change in our lives. In doing so, we will acquire the real learning and maturity that is required of us. Let me now talk to you about mega trends, because mega trends is what is changing our lives and will in the 21st century. The concept of mega trends is defined as large-scale change in circumstances of fashion, and it's a concept which attempts to predict where change in society is heading. The world today is witnessing massive changes of technological advancement, globalization, financial crisis, unemployment, and climate change. It is becoming increasingly clear that we need to both rethink the nature of the human journey as well as create a new economic narrative on which to base this. India, with its billion-plus population, has to deal with this evolving scenario to ensure the bright future of its coming generations. This demographic dividend of India has been well documented and deliberated. You know that India is going to be the world's youngest nation. As you may or may not be aware, by 2020, we will have the average or median age in India at 27 years, which means that 600 million people will be below the age of 30. It's the largest such semblance of people in the world, and therefore the largest working age population. Can we ensure in India that this does not become a demographic disaster? And the only way it cannot is when there is enough employment for people. Access to knowledge has flattened the world. Major opportunities are available to anybody who can utilize the benefits of this knowledge revolution. Entrepreneurs across the world become global providers of offshore services and manufactured products. In India, this revolution of information and communication technologies has not only made communication cheap through universal access, but it's also dramatically changing the ecosystem of business. Companies are now innovating not just for the rich, but also for the poor. And we have concepts of jugaad, Fluger engineering, fortune at the bottom of the pyramid, etc. Industry and after industry, from factory production to banking services, there's a dramatic increase in productivity which allows us to produce more output. The key is, or the fact of the last few years is, that this more output is coming with fewer workers. This is the disconnect between productivity gains and job losses. In the single period between 1995 and 2002, more than 31 million manufacturing jobs disappeared in the 20 largest economies, while productivity at the same time rose by over 4% and global industrial production increased by 30%. If this trend continues, and it's likely to, with the introduction of even smarter technologies, it is estimated that global manufacturing employment will decrease from 163 million workers to probably just 20 or 30 million workers by 2040 or 2050. Intelligent technology is taking over a multitude of jobs once performed by human beings across sectors, from retail to hospitals to hotels to railways and governments. This mega trend of replacement of jobs by technology has been written about by a very famous economist called Jeremy Rifkin, who is founder and president of the Foundation of Economic Trends in USA. And he projects that by 2050 will occur what is referred to or is being talked about now as the third industrial revolution. The second half of the 21st century will be characterized by boutique, high-tech, professional workforces, programming and monitoring intelligent technology systems. All of this begs the question, how will you keep hundreds of millions of people employed as we move future and further into this century? In India too, intelligent technologies are making major disruptive changes. From ICT-enabled services which have taken away thousands of jobs overseas and brought them into India with BPO services, we now see that even this software coding is itself cooling down and moving to other countries. There is explosive growth in data entry jobs at the moment created by projects such as Aadhaar, but at the same time, this progress in an automated form captures technologies and web-gate captures, which creates a tipping point where after a while, half of these recently created jobs will vanish. Therefore, preparing the workforce and citizenry for this new society will require rethinking of traditional educational models, with emphasis on rigid instruction and reductionist thinking and autonomous learning. In the new globally connected era, the primary mission of education is to prepare students to think and act as part of a global shared biosphere. This requires major changes in education and teaching practices. In disciplinary systems, multiracial studies, emphatic scientific experimentation, all these changes have to be brought into the education system. This new distributed and collaborative learning mirrors the way you in the young generation have already learned how to share your ideas, particularly through open source and social media sites. In India, the education system is in a bit of a flux. Policymakers and educationists are debating policy reforms for decades. There is now time to look at a model framework of aligned and collaborative education. Many countries, many thinkers, and within our country, departments are looking at these new ideas to see in what way we can redo or rework this whole new way of thinking. Fundamentally, we are poised to take a leap forward with the concept of these mega trends which are emerging on the third industrial revolution that I've just mentioned to you about, which incidentally the European Union has already taken up and is implementing in its member states. We, in business, I represent a business organization, we are already working on this idea, and we are trying to see how other educational institutions and the government can get involved in this, because you in your future generation will be impacted by this major change that is going to occur in your life.